I used to think my life was perfectly normal, maybe even dull. I had a husband who provided, a home that looked decent on the outside, and a son who was growing into a fine young man. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong. But inside, I felt empty. My husband and I had been married for more than a decade, yet for years, we lived more like polite strangers than lovers. He worked long hours, came home late, and when he did, his eyes were fixed on his phone, his laptop, or simply the television. I can't remember the last time he truly looked at me, the last time he noticed if I had changed my hair, or the last time he asked how I felt. At first, I told myself this was just how marriages evolve, that passion fades, and routine takes over. I tried to accept the loneliness. I busied myself with chores, with maintaining appearances, with playing the role of a wife who never complains. But deep inside, there was a hunger I couldn't name. It wasn't just physical. It was the need to feel alive, to feel wanted, to feel that my presence mattered to someone. Ironically, the person who noticed this quiet ache wasn't my husband at all. It was my son. He wasn't a child anymore. He had grown tall, his shoulders broadening, his voice carrying the calm authority of a young man. But what stood out most was his attentiveness. He noticed things my husband didn't. If I seemed tired, he would ask if I had eaten. If I looked worried, he would sit beside me until I talked. He carried a tenderness that I hadn't experienced in so long, and at first, I brushed it off as the natural care of a son who loved his mother. Yet, over time, the way he looked at me began to feel different. His eyes lingered a second too long. His words carried a softness that stirred something in me. There was an evening when we were sitting together, the television playing in the background, and his hand brushed against mine on the sofa. It was an innocent touch, accidental even, but the way my heart leapt in that moment unsettled me. I should have pulled away. Instead, I froze, letting that electric jolt run through me. I told myself it meant nothing, but the memory clung to me like a forbidden secret. My husband, of course, remained blind to it all. If anything, he grew colder, more detached. There were nights when he didn't even come home, and when I asked, he dismissed me with a vague excuse about work or late meetings. I stopped asking eventually. I stopped expecting. The silence between us grew into a wall so thick that even our son must have felt it. That was when his presence became more than comforting. It became the only warmth in my life. He began to step into spaces where my husband should have been. Helping with household tasks, asking about my day, making me laugh when he saw I was sad. It was such a stark contrast to the indifference I endured that I found myself relying on him emotionally more and more. And while I wanted to believe it was still innocent, deep down, I knew a dangerous line was slowly blurring. That night, when I lay down alone once again in my bed, I couldn't stop my thoughts from circling. I kept asking myself why I was feeling this way, why his nearness affected me so strongly. I tried to push it down, tried to bury it under guilt and denial. But the truth is, a part of me was already craving what I wasn't supposed to. And though I didn't know it then, the moment was coming when that craving would no longer stay hidden. That night, everything shifted in a way I never imagined possible. I remember drifting into sleep, the house quiet, the same emptiness wrapping around me as it always did when my husband was away. I didn't expect to be disturbed. But then, in the middle of the night, I felt the faint dip of the mattress beside me. At first, I thought it was him finally coming home, slipping into bed without a word as he often did. But when I opened my eyes, it wasn't my husband at all. It was my son. My heart raced. He looked at me with a softness that unsettled me, his voice low as he said he couldn't sleep, that he just needed to be near me. I should have told him to go back to his room, but instead, I felt my resistance falter. I was so used to an empty side of the bed that the warmth of another body so close to mine stirred something I had long buried. He lay there quietly at first, almost like a child seeking comfort. I told myself that was all it was, a son wanting his mother's presence. But the stillness of the night, the closeness of his breath against my skin, the faint brush of his arm against mine, it awakened feelings I couldn't deny. My body reacted before my mind could catch up, every nerve alive in a way it hadn't been for years. I told myself to remain calm, to pretend it meant nothing. But when he reached out and took my hand, holding it gently, I couldn't ignore the rush of heat that coursed through me. His grip wasn't childlike. It was deliberate, almost protective, as though he were shielding me from the loneliness I had carried for so long. I froze, torn between the voice screaming at me that this was wrong and the part of me that was starved for touch, desperate to be wanted. His words broke the silence, words I never expected to hear. He said he hated seeing me sad, that he noticed how often I cried quietly when I thought no one was watching. He admitted he wanted me to feel loved again, that he couldn't stand the way his father ignored me. My chest tightened with guilt and shame, but also with something far more dangerous, longing. I had waited years for someone to say those things to me, to see me, to acknowledge the pain I carried. And here he was, giving me everything I had been denied, even if it came from the one person it never should have. I should have pulled my hand away. I should have ended it right then. But instead, I let his fingers intertwine with mine. I let the silence stretch, thick with tension, while my heart pounded in my chest. I felt my resolve slipping, every second of his closeness erasing the boundaries I once thought were unbreakable. He shifted closer, his head resting near mine, his voice no louder than a whisper. He said he would always be there for me, that he would never let me feel unloved again. My breath caught in my throat, because I knew this was the moment where everything could spiral out of control. Yet I didn't stop him. The truth was, I didn't want to. That night, in the shadows of my room, I gave in to a feeling I had fought for so long. I let myself be consumed by the warmth I had been craving, even though every part of me knew it was forbidden. And as it happened, a part of me shattered, because I understood there was no going back. From that night forward, nothing about my life would ever be the same. The morning after was unlike any other. I woke with the weight of what had happened pressing heavily against my chest. For a few moments, I lay there in silence, unsure if it had all been a dream. But when I turned my head and saw him quietly slipping out of the room, I knew it was real. My breath caught, and shame burned through me. I wanted to bury myself under the sheets, to hide from the truth, but the reality was impossible to escape. At breakfast, the silence was unbearable. He sat across from me, eyes fixed on his plate, his movements cautious. I tried to act normal, but every glance felt charged with the memory of what we had done. My husband wasn't there, of course, he had left early as usual, his absence as predictable as the sunrise. That emptiness, once bitter, now felt even heavier because of the secret I was carrying. I sipped my tea, my hands trembling slightly, praying he wouldn't look up. But then he did. For the briefest second, our eyes met, and in that look, everything was said without words. Days passed, and the air between us only grew thicker. There were moments when he brushed past me in the hallway, and the touch of his arm against mine sent a shiver racing down my spine. There were times he lingered in the kitchen just a little longer, asking about my day, watching me in a way that made my heart pound with equal parts desire and fear. I wanted to tell him to stop, to draw a line, but the truth was I didn't want it to end. I had lived too long feeling invisible, and now, every stolen glance, every subtle touch, made me feel alive again. Meanwhile, my husband remained blind. He came and went with the same indifference, never questioning the tension that brewed in the house. I should have been relieved that he didn't notice, but instead, I felt an odd resentment. How could he not see? How could he fail to sense that something had changed between his wife and his son? His ignorance only fueled the fire inside me, making me drift further into dangerous territory. I tried to silence the guilt that gnawed at me. Late at night, when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I asked myself what kind of person I had become. I told myself it was wrong, unforgivable, but in the same breath, I remembered the way he had held my hand, the way his voice had carried genuine care. That contrast, the emptiness of my husband and the warmth of my son, kept me trapped in a whirlwind I couldn't escape. It wasn't always physical. Sometimes, it was just the way he would lean close to whisper something only I could hear, or the way his smile softened when our eyes locked. But even those small gestures carried a weight that could crush us if exposed. Every moment felt like walking on a fragile line, one misstep away from disaster. And disaster nearly came one evening. My husband returned home earlier than expected, stepping into the living room just as I sat too close beside my son. The sight must have looked innocent enough, but my heart nearly leapt out of my chest. My son quickly shifted, creating distance, and I forced a casual smile, praying my husband wouldn't notice the panic in my eyes. He didn't. He muttered something about work, dropped his bag, and went upstairs without a second glance. I exhaled in relief, but the terror lingered. We had been seconds away from everything unraveling. Yet even after that close call, the pull between us only grew stronger. It was as if the risk made it more intoxicating, as if each secret moment tied us closer together. And though I knew we were walking toward destruction, I couldn't bring myself to stop. The weight of what we had done eventually became impossible to ignore. For weeks, I lived in a constant storm of emotions, desire pulling me one way, guilt dragging me another. Every time I looked at my husband, a knot tightened in my stomach. He didn't know, but I felt his presence as an unspoken judgment, as though at any moment the truth might slip from my lips and shatter everything. My son seemed calmer, steadier, almost protective, but I could see in his eyes that he understood the danger as much as I did. The cracks in my marriage grew sharper. My husband's indifference no longer just stung, it enraged me. When he brushed off conversations, when he failed to notice my mood, when he turned his back to me at night, I felt a bitterness that bordered on hatred. I told myself that he had pushed me into this, that his neglect was the reason I had crossed such a forbidden line. But no matter how I tried to justify it, deep inside, I knew the choice had been mine. Then came the moment I had dreaded. My husband grew suspicious. Maybe it was the way I avoided his touch, or the way my son lingered a little too long in the kitchen when I was there. One evening, he asked a question that froze me in place. Had something been going on between us? He said it almost casually, as if half joking, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't laughing. I denied it instantly, my voice trembling, my hands clenched so tightly they hurt. My son looked down at the floor, silent, and in that silence, I feared everything was over. The days that followed were tense, unbearable. My husband grew distant in a different way, not with indifference, but with suspicion. He began watching us more closely, asking where I was, questioning why our son was always around me. I felt like the walls were closing in, every breath heavy with the possibility of discovery. One night, overwhelmed by guilt, I broke. I told my son we couldn't go on like this, that whatever had happened between us needed to end. He looked at me with a pain that tore me apart. He said he loved me, that he couldn't stand to see me unhappy, that he had given me what no one else had. My eyes filled with tears because I knew he was right, but I also knew it couldn't continue. I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and every day it stayed hidden was a ticking time bomb. Ending it didn't erase it. The memory clung to me like a shadow. I tried to repair things with my husband, but there was nothing left to repair. His indifference remained, his eyes still cold, and I no longer had the strength to keep pretending. The home that once felt lonely now felt unbearable, haunted by what I had done and what I had lost. My son, too, began to withdraw. Our moments together became fewer, our conversations strained. He carried his own guilt, his own confusion, and I watched the distance grow between us, even as my heart ached for him. In the end, I was left with nothing. My husband stayed, but the marriage was hollow, a fragile shell of what it once pretended to be. My son drifted further away, and the bond we had shared was replaced with silence. I stood in the middle of it all, broken, torn apart by choices I could never take back. That night changed everything. It gave me a glimpse of passion, of being wanted, but it also destroyed the foundation of my life. I never expected it to happen, never expected to feel what I felt, and never expected the consequences that followed. I live with the weight of it every day, knowing I betrayed not just my husband, but myself. And though I may spend the rest of my life hiding it from the world, I can never hide it from my own heart.